Hello and welcome to my keynote on parts are parts, the joining of mainframe and distributed and cloud native continuous delivery. But first, let me thank the Open Mainframe Project and the Continuous Delivery Foundation for inviting me here today. The Open Mainframe Project contacted the CDF and said, hey, do you have somebody who wants to talk about continuous delivery? And my name came up, so thank you very much to both. And if you've never heard of the Continuous Delivery Foundation, you should check us out. We seek to improve the world's capacity to deliver software with both security and speed. And me, I am Tracy Ragan. I am the CEO of a company called DeployHub. I am somewhat of a microservice evangelist. I'm super passionate about the new cloud native platforms. I also am very passionate about configuration management. In fact, cut my teeth on the mainframe and learned how important SCM was during the early days of my career. I'm currently sit as a community director for the Ortelius open source project. I am a founding board member of the Eclipse Foundation and the CD Foundation. You may have seen me at the DevOps Institute before. I am a DevOps ambassador and I get involved in many of those conversations. So what we're really going to talk about is the goal of bridging the gap between the mainframe and its other components, really. The distributed side, traditional Java development, jar files, and now what we're calling cloud native. These hybrid environments have always been critical to larger enterprises. The use of a mainframe as a data store has pretty much been standard for quite some time. If you have a mainframe already and you've got all that data in DB2, that's generally where you want to keep it. And so we have these hybrid environments that we have managed for quite some time, but we have never really been good at automating the process of moving a mainframe change and coordinating that with what's happening on the distributed side of the house. I'm talking about, a Windows environment or a Linux environment. So we have siloed these changes and this coordination with different tools, using mainframe tools to manage the mainframe and using distributed tools to manage the distributed side, and we've never figured out how to join the two together. It's time we do that. We are moving into a whole new world with cloud native and microservices, and your mainframe parts are going to start being microservices someday. I've seen people already talking about doing that, so it's happening. So we need a way to really manage all of these moving pieces. So really what I'm talking about is a cooperative continuous delivery. We think about a cooperative kind of continuous delivery on the distributed side when we think about we have jar files we have to change, we have database updates we have to change, and sometimes even the infrastructure has to change. And I think even the infrastructure kind of changing is even becoming more apparent as we move into cloud native, as we can spin up these environments quickly and bring them down quickly. They're not static anymore. Everything's very dynamic. And so we have to have a more cooperative approach to managing all of these parts. And we have to stop segregating those parts based on where their endpoint, their runtime is, whether it be on the mainframe, their runtime, or whether it be on a Windows machine, or in a Linux environment, or in a Kubernetes cluster. That shouldn't define the process of how we move things across the lifecycle. Everything really should be managed in a similar way. So this is going to require a shift in thinking. And it's really time to accept that all software should be managed the same, even though it might be we're using different tools to do the management, but we have to think about how we can coordinate all these moving parts together. And to really fully understand the simple concept that a part is simply a part. A part is a component, and applications are a collection of components. Those components could be running on the mainframe, those components could be running in a Kubernetes cluster, and those components could be running in a more traditional, kind of a monolithic style, traditional distributed development. Should not really matter. It's just it's just where they end up. It doesn't define their life cycle. So after all, parts are just parts. So I'm going to give you three shifts to think about. The first shift number 1, is to understand that the different parts of a system are always similar. They have attributes, and those attributes equate to something. You might have mainframe parts that are being managed in an Endeavor repository, and you might have distributed parts that are being managed in a Git repository. You may have builds. You may have builds being done on the mainframe by Endeavor processors. Thank you, Endeavor, for doing that all these years. I don't think I would have ever wanted to write my own compiled JCL. On the distributed side, they like to write their own compiled JCL. That's starting to change as well. Release logic. Release logic, every single part has its own release logic. That's just an attribute. And parameters. We often call parameters in the cloud native world key value pairs, but they're environment variables. And every part has a set of environment variables. It doesn't matter if it runs on the mainframe or a Windows or Linux or a cluster. It has environment variables. It has a set of parameters. And this is the same for all software. So all software is exactly the same in that way. It's what makes us common. It's the common part of software. Shift number 2. Okay, acknowledge that the mainframe has figured out a lot about DevOps. Certainly, mainframers were leaders in DevOps thought. We just didn't know it on the distributed platform because we weren't watching closely enough to what you have done for years and years to make everything run so smoothly. We need to understand on the distributed side that we have to catch up. On the distributed side, we haven't done as good a job as the mainframe as creating a repeatable process from dev, test, and prod. And this is partly the reason why we have segregated the mainframe and the distributed side, because on the distributed side we get to dev, we do that pretty well. We get to test, we do that pretty well. And then we get it to production, but we throw it over a wall, and production often does something different. It's not the same on the mainframe. On the mainframe side, everything is flowing through in a very repeatable way. So it breaks. And so to connect the mainframe and the distributed side must figure out how to get it all the way to production. And of course, I always talk about this, but what does Endeavor stand for? It stands for Environment for Dev and Operations. So these traditional mainframe tools like Librarian and ChangeMan and Endeavor, they were the first DevOps tools, and you guys have done a really great job with kind of leading the way in what DevOps really means. Shift 3, I call this the essentials. I often hear, when I have these discussions with people, sometimes they say, well, we need a single lifecycle management tool that will manage both the mainframe and it will manage the distributed side, and it will manage cloud native, it will manage whatever kind of product you are creating. And that could be the case. But I think we have to acknowledge that there are tools like Endeavor and ChangeMan and Librarian who do really well in the mainframe. We don't need to change that. We do need to make some better changes in terms of the distributed side in pushing things all the way to production. But those still should be managed in those tools. What I believe will be happening in the future as we see things as more parts, and these components are, it doesn't really matter what's pushing it, if Endeavor's pushing it or if Jenkins is pushing it. What really matters is what they look like. For example, what we talked about in terms of the different attributes. We're going to start seeing catalogs manage all of the pieces and parts and start collecting this kind of data. For example, where the inventory is, what the dependencies are, what the ownership is, who owns that particular part, and its usage. Do developers like using this microservice? Was this a good query? All of this can be connected into a centralized repository of data where Endeavor is reporting into it, and the other CD pipelines are reporting into it, whether it be Jenkins or whether it be Circle CI. That information then becomes aggregated in one place, and then we can take we can create some actionable results. We can start understanding how things are used. We have one place to go to see how things are pushed across, and we can start versioning components together that need to be moved together and create a centralized location for managing all of these parts. Doesn't matter if they're managed on the mainframe or if they're being pushed to a Kubernetes cluster. It's just a part with attributes, and it has an inventory, it has dependencies, and it has owners and usage. So in this 10 minutes, I hope I've given you something to think about in terms of what the future might look like and how we can marry the mainframe and the distributed side and the cloud native components into one location and start tracking this information and creating some collaboration and coordination that can be done in an automated way. So thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk today. And if you don't know about the Continuous Delivery Foundation, go check us out at cd.foundation. And if you would like to chat about this or any other similar topic, you can reach me, send me a message on LinkedIn at Tracy-Ragan-OMS, and follow me on Twitter. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the show.